So generally, when people are getting started with cold email for the first time, they usually ask me, "Hey Patrick, I want to do cold emailing, but I just don't know who I should email. Where do I start?" And so in this section, what we're going to do is cover exactly who you should target to get the most amount of reward for the time you put in. So we're going to introduce to you the ideal customer profile, also known as ICP in the sales world. So for an ideal customer profile, generally what you're doing is that you're identifying or creating some type of avatar of who you believe will be the best customer for you. And so basically you're trying to figure out what your product or service is and who best you can serve, and those are the people that you're going to go after. And the reason why you want to do this is because you don't want to waste your time with people who just plainly aren't a good fit for your product or service, and you want to go for people who are really likely to buy. And so when you're mapping out your ideal customer profile, you want to map out the characteristics of your top 5 to 10% of customers, meaning that, if you already have customers, look at who's generating the top 5 to 10% of the revenue and go for people like that. You don't want to waste your time with the other 90% because they're just not going to really be that impactful to your business. So focus on what's working and hyper focus on that, and that's how you're going to scale up. And the second part to really pay attention to is you want to go for people that have the high likelihood of purchasing, meaning that certain potential customers that you might talk to, there may be certain deal breakers that make it very unlikely for them to purchase your product or service. So you want to just go for the people that, have a high chance of buying, because why would you spend time on people who aren't going to buy anything at all? And so when you're creating the ideal customer profile, there's a lot of ways you can slice and dice it, and it really depends on what your product or service is and who you're trying to serve. So I'm going to go ahead and give you an example one, and again, the variables will differ depending on what you're selling. Let's say my ideal target customer is, they work in X industry, they have X in yearly revenue, they have X amount of employees, and a special thing might be they use cryptocurrency to accept payments. So you might be only targeting companies that use cryptocurrency for those things, depending on what you're selling. And the last part is currently experiences X pain caused by Y problem. And this is really important because when you're thinking about prospecting and sales in general, you want to look at where people are facing the most pain. So where does it hurt the most? And the more it hurts, the more likely someone is willing to spend money to solve that problem. So not only are you selling something, you want to think of yourself as somewhat of a doctor and you're solving somebody's pain. An example of that would be using the ideal customer profile that I created would be if someone accepts cryptocurrencies to accept payments, they might be experiencing a really big problem of being hacked and someone stealing all of their data on their customers. So if you are a cryptocurrency consultant, you might be solving that specific pain and preventing their system from getting hacked, because if they get hacked, their business is dead. So that's just an example of how you can think about your ideal customer profile. Again, you could swap out the different variables, like adding things like their geolocation has to be in California or New York, or it might be you only target companies that use Oracle software. So whatever the case may be, you want to just slice and dice it so that it makes sense to you. But the main point is you're solving for someone's pain and you're creating all these variables of what fits your ideal customer profile. And so as you get an idea of who this person is, things are going to get a lot more easy. The reason is because of something called the network effect. So the network effect is essentially when you start getting your first few customers, your company or your brand starts developing logos. And so the more people you work with in a specific niche, the more other people want to work with you. So for example, let's say you're selling a service to all the doctors in Los Angeles. So if you have the top doctors in California, in Los Angeles using your product or service, all the other doctors are going to want to use your service as well. Because if the top people are using it, they're going to think, why don't I use it as well? I'm falling behind the competition. So the more logos that you're able to get, the easier it is for people to want to work with you because you're building that credibility. And so to recap everything, Building an ideal customer profile is probably the most important aspect of prospecting because it's defining on what type of companies you are going for, and it's going to give you a data set so that you know exactly what's working and what's not. And if your first ideal customer profile isn't working for you, then you can make some changes to the variables and then go out and email more people, and you slowly start testing to see what is working. That's everything you need to know in creating your ideal customer profile. Again, customize it to whatever business you're in and what you're selling. And so the most important thing is to have this in mind as you move forward and you start building your list of people who you're going to reach out to. So when I first started in sales, I remember I cold emailed this financial tech company who I thought seemed very promising for the software that I was selling at the time. So they agreed to a meeting, we got on the phone, and they seemed like they were on board. And the thing was, every week they would want another meeting with me, and they required so much time. And the thing was, because I didn't really have too many options when I first started out, I just kept investing time into them, believing that they would buy something with me in the long term and it would be all worth it in the end. They took so much of my time, and in the end, they barely bought anything. It was a complete waste of my time. And in parallel, I remember I emailed this other company who bought way more software than the first one did in just like in a fraction of the time. So in one company, I put in a ton of effort, barely got anything out of it. And on the other side, I put very little effort and got a ton out of it. And so this really got me thinking about how I thought about how much effort I was putting into a potential customer and how much revenue I was generating from it. And it led me to a graph that I created for you guys. So this graph is called the effort versus revenue graph. And on the left hand side, where it's the vertical axis, that's how much effort and time you put into your deals. And so on the bottom, it's going to be revenue. So in the beginning, that first company I was talking to, I put in a ton of effort and got very little revenue out of it. And so in this quadrant, this is where you do not want to be. And so over here, it's going to be companies where you put in low effort, but then you get low revenue, which isn't the best because you want to maximize the amount of revenue you put in. But then again, it is low effort, so it's okay. So the next spot is going to be high revenue for high effort. And so this is where things become a little bit more lucrative, but you got to put in the work. And finally, we got the high revenue, low effort. And then this quadrant, this is where you want to be. So when you think about where you're putting your time into your deals and who you're emailing, you want to think about the companies that you feel like are ready to buy, where you don't have to invest so much time and effort into them, and they're going to give you a high return. And so as you think about your prospecting strategy and who exactly you're going to email, these are the aspects you want to think about so that you go for the people that can give you the most revenue for the least amount of effort. And so bringing it back, one thing that's really good about outbound emailing is that you get to choose who you work with. Meaning, if there's someone who's just wasting your time, they're kicking tires, just let them go, because when you have an outbound email strategy, you just email 100 more companies who have a way more potential to generate you more revenue. You want to think in an abundance mentality. Don't just spend all your time on deals on companies that you started to work with in the beginning just because that's all you got. You want to think like you want to keep emailing more and more people so that you have options. You got to prize yourself and think of yourself as someone that really provides value, and that whoever you work with, they're lucky to work with you. And so when you develop that abundance mentality, you're going to start thinking of your time as very valuable, and you're only going to work with people who respect your time and where you see the financial benefit of it. And so that's all I really want to say about how you spend your time versus how much reward you're getting, because when you're developing your outbound strategy, it's going to be very important to let go of the losers and figure out what's working and go for the winners.